She hadn't heard her husband's name spoken in 47 years, until a stranger in a NASA jacket whispered it behind her. The chairs were lined in neat rows, polished and cold beneath the morning sun. Flags rippled in the distance, bugle notes hung in the air like ghosts. She sat in the third row from the back, a small, fragile figure in a faded navy coat, a white carnation pinned to her chest, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her name was Margaret Ellis. Everyone else was in pairs, sons, daughters, wives, husbands. They leaned on each other, spoke in whispers. Margaret sat alone. She had done this every year since 1976. She didn't come for speeches. She came for the silence, the moment when taps played and she could close her eyes and feel him again. She remembered the last time she saw Captain John Ellis. He stood on the tarmac in a flight suit, smiling like a man who wasn't going to war. "I'll be back before the flowers bloom," he'd said. She'd laughed, kissed his cheek, fixed the collar of his jacket. He was being reassigned to a classified launch assistance program, something to do with Cold War reconnaissance. That's all she ever knew. 2 months later, there was a knock at the door. A letter, a folded flag, and then nothing. No grave, no body, just a file marked MIA. She never remarried, never stopped setting his coffee cup on the table in the morning. 47 years. No one had said his name out loud since, until today. People turned as the black SUV pulled up near the ceremony grounds. It wasn't loud, no fanfare, just a quiet hum and a man stepping out, older, upright, clean-cut, wearing a deep blue NASA jacket with a silver patch no one had seen in decades. A whisper moved through the crowd. "Is that—" But Margaret didn't look. Her gaze stayed on the flagpole, eyes misted, hands still folded. The man walked slowly, not because he was weak, but because every step seemed deliberate, as if he was walking across memory, not asphalt. When he reached the back row, he paused, scanned the chairs, then moved forward directly toward Margaret. She noticed his presence before she saw him, a shift in the air, a warmth beside her, and then a voice, software gravelly, carried by wind and something else, something old. "Mrs. Ellis?" Her breath caught. No one had called her that in years. Most just said ma'am or Margaret. She turned, looked into the eyes of a stranger, but not unfamiliar. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said, "but I knew your husband." She didn't speak, couldn't. He leaned closer and whispered the words she hadn't heard in 47 years. "John used to talk about you before every launch. His name was Colonel David Rourke, retired astronaut, test pilot, decorated veteran, one of the last men alive who had trained for the classified joint launch operations of 1976. He'd flown once with John Ellis, just once. I was in the backup capsule," Rourke said, eyes on the horizon. "John was lead on a recon satellite redirect. He volunteered. The mission went dark. I thought it would stay that way forever." Margaret's lips trembled. "He never came home." Rourke nodded slowly. "I know, but I never stopped looking." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sealed envelope. This was never supposed to exist, but John wrote it the night before launch, slipped it into my locker, said, "If anything happens, she needs to know I never stopped loving her." She stared at the envelope like it was glowing. Margaret's hands shook as she opened the letter. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was him. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then I'm not where I promised I'd be. I'm sorry. I kept you in my heart through every drill, every simulation, every silence in space. I signed up for this knowing the cost, but I never counted you among the things I could afford to lose. I love you. I always will. Tell the stars I said goodbye. John." When she looked up, tears silently tracing her cheeks, Rourke was still standing beside her, not as a stranger anymore, but as the last voice from a time the world had forgotten. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The ceremony ended. The bugle played. The names were read. But Margaret didn't move. Not right away. The letter sat in her lap like a second heartbeat. A weight, not heavy but grounding. Rourke stayed beside her until the crowd began to thin. Then, gently, he stepped back, nodded once, and disappeared the same way he arrived. No speech, no camera, just silence. Later that night, Margaret placed the letter in a frame beside John's old flight photo. For the first time in decades, she made tea for two and left his cup full. At sunrise, she returned to the memorial bench near her home. A folded American flag rested beside her, and beside that, a small NASA pin. She didn't know who had placed it there, but she understood why. Have you ever known someone like Margaret? Someone who waited quietly, without complaint, holding on to the echo of a voice the world chose to forget? Or maybe someone like John, who left without glory, without applause, but with a letter in his locker that said everything his uniform never could. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't found in novels. They're tucked inside old envelopes, hidden behind medals no one wears anymore, whispered at memorials, felt in silence. So now I ask you, have you ever heard a name that made you stop and remember? If so, say it in the comments. Say it for the ones who never came home. Say it for the ones who waited. Say it because they deserve to be remembered. And if this story touched you, subscribe to the Astronaut Stories, where we honor the voices that were never meant to be loud, but always meant to last. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, if you ever see someone sitting alone at a ceremony, look closer. You might be sitting beside a legend's last witness.